The Poetry Nook is a cozy monthly conversation about the magic of poetry as a mirror and a container for our lives. In each episode, we bring one poem to the table, or maybe two or three, on a theme that speaks to us, and we talk through all of the language, the logic, and the emotions that come with each of them. I am Analía Gomez-Pidal.
And I'm Charlie Hunt. Welcome to the Poetry Nook. Happy summer, Annie. Welcome back to the Nook.
Happy summer, Charlie, though I have my take on summer. How are you doing these days?
I'm doing pretty good. I feel like I'm anticipating, you sent me your poem, which I tried to do a rough translation of using various softwares, and it seems like we might have different outlooks on summer, but we embrace the seasons here at the Poetry Nook. I feel like we have created a kind of tradition of doing an episode about the new season at the onset of each new season. And I love that. We've talked before about how poetry is, I think, the perfect vehicle for looking at the seasons and the changes that come with them. What comes up for you when you're thinking about the summer? Like what sort of poetic headspace are you in when you're thinking about this very hot, very potentially difficult season?
Well, so it's interesting because, to what you were saying, we have talked so much about, seasonality, not just in the literal sense of each season and the weather and all this stuff, but also in our lives, right? And so I think that this would be like the third of those episodes, with the last one being probably around our first year anniversary in the fall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I think that when I think about summer in general, there are like two things that come up. The first one is, as I mentioned in, I think, the winter episode, that because I grew up in the Southern Hemisphere, for me, there is a shift, right? And so like I traditionally associated summer with, like December through March, instead of, thinking about this season like in the Northern Hemisphere, where we go like through, June to September. And that has shifted a whole lot, even in thinking, how much of the academic calendar also follows along, which was completely a complete shift for me. Mm-hmm. Then there is the other element of that, which has been very interesting. And I was thinking about this as we were preparing for today, which is, regardless of what hemisphere I have been in, I never really liked summer. And so when I was growing up, part of the reason why I didn't love summer was because I was such a nerd that I just loved being in school and being busy and like doing stuff around. And I felt like the summer was this lull where there's not a lot of fun like embedded in here, despite what others might think. And so there was that element. There's also the part of, having been born in February means that it was like a very odd timing in summer back home to celebrate my birthday, which also shifted my perspective. And then I moved here, and so the calendar shift, and now my birthday I celebrated during winter, which I am very happy about. And I moved to the DMV area, which means that summer is this like hot, humid, suffocating thing that is probably one of my least favorite things about living in the DC area.
It's not ideal. I mean, you and I shared that location for a long time, and I can't. There's no way I can argue with you there on the suffocating nature of DC. I do this program with my school where we send 8 students to DC for the spring semester, and they get to see, the cherry blossoms bloom, and it's very beautiful and stuff. And then some of them, because they're, overachievers, they'll stick around in the summer and like get a job or get an internship. And I'll be like, look, I'm just warning you, it is a very different place. And they'll be like, I'm sure I'll be fine. And then they're like just sweating the entire time. And they're like, well, you warned me, Charlie.
That is basically where like the honeymoon phase bubble pops, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, if you survive the summer here, you're good to go. But given that I already don't particularly enjoy the season in general, then moving here just exacerbated that for me.
Yes.
But like we have said many times, despite me not liking summer and ranking it as like my least favorite season, that doesn't mean that I cannot appreciate it for what it brings and what it has to offer. So I am not that much of a hater after all.
No, we can make, I'm not a big winter guy, but there are still parts of it that I love. And these are the lessons we learn about loving the situation we're in, having radical love for it, even when it is hard, which is a very difficult thing to do. But it is important to sort of honor the parts of it that are difficult and be clear and honest about them. And in that spirit, I wonder if you want to share your poem first, Annie.
Yes.
Which and I want to be clear. So you sent this poem to me, and I gather you couldn't find a translation from the Spanish. My Spanish is horrible. I can pick out a word here and there, but I am not. We only have one bilingual co-host of this podcast, and it's you. So I'll be relying on you a little bit. I did use a couple of different, software exists, but that seems like a kind of a. I sort of cringed while I used technology and software to create a translation for this beautiful poem, and so I'm going to try not to rely on that too much and just let your reading of it move me as it is. So,
and if anything, I am very curious to hear what came up when you were doing that. But also, this is a good heads up for anyone listening who is not bilingual, that unfortunately, as much as I try really hard to pick poems that have both an English and Spanish version, this one was not one of them. But it spoke to me enough that I figured this is a good experiment for all of us to go through. And we will include the text, as always, for the poem, so that you can also do the Charlie exercise of looking for ways of connecting with it in your native language.
Yes, absolutely.
So the poem that I bring today is called Un Verano by Idea Vilariño, who is a Uruguayan poet. Un Verano by Idea Vilariño. Hago muecas a veces para no poner cara de tristeza, para olvidarme, amor, para ahuyentar mis duros, mis crueles pensamientos. ¿Cómo he de hacer, amor, para vivir aún, para sufrir aún este verano? Pesa mucho, me pesa como si el mar pesara con su bloque tremendo sobre mi espalda. Me hunde en la más negra tierra del dolor y me deja ahí deshecha, amor, sola ahí, tu abandono.
So what is it, before we get into sort of some of the meanings and potential translations, what drew you to this poem? Do you feel like it captures some thoughts that you have, or some kind of attachments or feelings that you have about summer?
Yeah, so initially what drew me to this poem is the combination of the contrast between, on one hand, summer and kind of like this idea that we have of summer and the sun and light, and the heaviness that the poem communicates. And so contrasting that was really enticing for me. I really appreciated that. There is also another layer that I discovered as I was thinking about this poem, which is, summer is also a time in which there is more rest, there is less routine, or there is some changes around. And I think I connected a little bit with the emo side of me when I was younger, because there is this theme of distance and heartbreak and abandonment that one can feel heightened when you are kind of like growing up and you think about, summer as a time where like you don't necessarily see most of your friends or your crushes. But at the same time, you might have summer flings, and those also break your heart. So I just really love that combination, and in a way that felt not obvious.
Yeah, I mean, and so I'll sort of get into a little bit some of the translation that I got, and certainly like I do think the main themes of the poem come across clearly. There's a lot of heartbreak here. Um, the I'll just read some of the English translation here of the from the middle of the poem. How am I to go on, my love, to still live, to still suffer this summer? It weighs heavily. It weighs on me as if the sea were weighing down with its tremendous mass on my back. It drags me down into the blackest depths of pain and leaves me there, broken, my love, alone there in your abandonment. So heavy stuff here, heavy stuff. And I love it in a way. I love that the reminder that it's helpful for me as someone who thinks about summer as this time of like joy and blooming and sunniness and warmth and maybe too much warmth, but yeah, you use the word flings and like the summer fling, right, which is kind of a I'm thinking of Grease, that song Summer Lovin', and the John Travolta of it all. But this is sort of the flip side, which is like you have, maybe you have a summer fling, or maybe not even like a romantic version of that, but you go on this big vacation maybe, or you go to Disney World, or you like do these really exciting summer things that you have time to do, and they're heightened and full of emotion and all of these things. But like any season, it ends. And even if you do take my kind of sunny view of the summer, there's always this come down. There's like it ends at some point, and it doesn't last forever. It is temporary. And so you need to sort of face up to whatever comes next, right? And I feel like, I'm not sure what backstory sort of preceded this poem for the poet, but clearly this is coming after some great love, right? That maybe was really joyful and sunny and full of sunshine and roses and all of these things, but these things can come next, and heartbreak can come next. And so I think it's an important reminder of the changes that can happen, and that even if you do have that these joyful times of summer are temporary, but so too are the painful moments, right? And so I appreciated that as a reminder.
And I will say, like, the way that you express it is kind of like what comes next. And in my mind, what sparks is like, well, it's also during. And the reason why I mentioned this, I'm not sure, like, I don't recall if I mentioned this in the previous episode, but earlier this year, I actually had a conversation with my therapist, and I asked her a couple of questions because I am very nerdy, even with my own therapist. And they shared with me that a season that it's like hard for a lot of people who deal with depression and anxiety and other mental health conditions is spring, because the transition that for a lot of people feels like almost like a relief, where like it starts, like things start blooming and there is more light and you get to enjoy yourself more. It doesn't feel that way for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
in some ways, maybe that was also part of what made it feel so resonant for me, the poem. It's like, yeah, everyone was happy about summer. I hated it. I was miserable.
Yeah.
And so like there is this element of sometimes we associate certain seasons with certain expectations of how we should feel or
Right.
what we should experience. And that is not always true. And so like a poem like this one kind of like opens that door to feel seen when your experience and your feelings do not necessarily align with what the stereotypical expectation of it can be.
I think that's such a great point, and I think a really important lesson of sort of confounding your own expectations and not, I think sometimes, I think I'm guilty of this, is sort of creating stereotypical versions of what a situation should be like or what a season should be like. And I do this with winter too. I love Christmas. I'm a big Christmas person. Uh, like I have unhealthy amounts of Christmas spirit, and and so I create, like, my wife and I host a big Christmas party every year for our friends here in Boise, and I have my idealized version of what this party should look like. Like everyone is having the perfect time, and we made exactly the right amount of food and like all of this stuff. And even more broadly, like I have this version of like, oh, what Christmas should look like with my family or with all of this stuff. And I love Christmas all the time, but of course it never lives exactly up to those expectations. And that in some ways, creating and building up all these expectations, can create suffering, can create when it inevitably falls short, or without making a value judgment, just doesn't look exactly like what you thought it would look like. And in a way, creating all these expectations can sort of trap you in some imagined interpretation of what a situation or what a season could look like, and it can be limiting, right? Rather than just coming to a season, coming to a situation exactly as it is and doing your best within it, which is something I have a great deal of difficulty with. Maybe that's why I automatically went to I tried to pull myself out of this feeling, even as you brought it in for the summer. So this is a good therapy session for me, I guess. But
I mean, I will say, it's interesting because in some ways I am very used to be a contrarian in a lot of ways. And so like this is no exception. But as it's not without an intention behind it, I guess. And so I think that it makes complete sense to, find yourself feeling excited for the things that, bring you joy and light. And summer can have a lot of those. And at the same time, you can also be a little bit of a summer Grinch like I am, and still, find your way through enjoying and accepting each season, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to, before we move on from it, I want to share with you the very first thought I had when I read this translation, to the extent that it's accurate, whatever that means. Have you ever seen the movie 500 Days of Summer?
Yes, many times.
It seems like your kind of movie. This is just because there's lots of like wild emotions and heartbreak, but it's a movie about heartbreak, and like that is what I thought of when I read the translation here, which is like it's about Summer, and the movie is about a girl named Summer, played by Zooey Deschanel, and this feels like Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character wrote this poem, basically.
Yeah, and we could go into a whole tangent about the movie itself and how it portrays like the love story and all of this stuff.
Yes.
There are like fantastic takes on this movie online. And I think the channel The Take has one that I found particularly interesting. But I did not think about that movie when I picked that poem, and yet Sweet Disposition by The Tender Trap is one of my hype songs of all times.
I mean, it's frankly, it's on my summer playlist that I've been for precisely this reason. But any more like thoughts on the, like lines maybe that you really liked that you want to highlight? I don't want to
Mhm.
give short shrift to this poem before we move on.
The main thing that I wanted to, highlight is this is my first time coming across work by Idea Vilariño. But another layer that I really, really appreciated about this poem is that the visuals were very
Hmm.
impactful. I think that it's such a fantastic job of kind of like bringing images immediately, right? Specifically, like, I am thinking about just starting the poem with like I'm making faces, hago muecas, right? Just trying to kind of like hide that discomfort, that pain. And then the description of the sea, the ocean, and just being like like feeling that like mass, el bloque tremendo. It really does such a beautiful job of bringing images to those heavy feelings that I'm sure this poem will stay with me for a long time, and I think in part it's because just like the visuals are striking
Hmm.
to me.
I totally agree. I really liked the I liked the use of the sea, the ocean as this as sort of a symbol of this weight, this mass of sadness that is on the speaker of the poem, especially in contrast to, again, like one of my things that I think a lot of people associate with summer is like going to the beach. The ocean is this like, fun place that families go and like, oh, you dip your toes in the water. And this is again sort of covering that other side of the coin that is always true about the ocean, even when you're having fun at it. It's like it's this tremendous, intimidating mass and can be dangerous and can cause pain and things like that. And just every the multiple sides to every sort of symbol that we create for ourselves.
And that it deepens the feeling because it can also feel lonely, right? Like the
Yes.
vastness of the sea can
Yes.
feel lonely in a way that really like drills into the abandonment that this person feels in the poem.
Yes, I'm actually thinking of the poem that you wrote that you shared a few
Yes.
episodes ago that uses that same theme of sort of loneliness, adriftness in the ocean very beautifully. So, so I can see why you were maybe drawn to this one. All right. Well, shall I share my poem, which I think takes a slightly different approach, but as usual, I'm sure we'll find our parallels between the two.
Mhm.
So the poem I chose is called Emergence. It is by Joy Harjo, who's one of my very favorites. She was a recent poet laureate of the United States. She's an indigenous poet, has written great, really moving poetry about the indigenous experience in the U.S. And but that's not a central focus of this particular poem, but she just has such a really incredible way with words. She's a very raw poet, I think. I think she gets at really raw emotions that I think will become clear as I read this. So this is Emergence by Joy Harjo. It's midsummer night. The light is skinny. A thin skirt of desire skims the earth. Dogs bark at the musk of other dogs and the urge to go wild. I am lingering at the edge of a broken heart, striking relentlessly against the flint of hard will. It's coming apart, and everyone knows it. So do squash erupting in flowers, the color of the sun. So does the momentum of grace gathering allies in the partying mob. The heart knows everything. I remember when there was no urge to cut the land or each other into pieces, when we knew how to think in beautiful. There is no world like the one surfacing. I can smell it as I pace in my square room, the neighbor's television entering my house by waves of sound. Makes me think about buying a new car, another kind of cigarette, when I don't need another car and I don't smoke cigarettes. A human mind is small when thinking of small things. It is large when embracing the maker of walking, thinking, and flying. If I can locate the sense beyond desire, I will not eat or drink until I stagger into the earth with grief. I will locate the point of dawning and awaken with the longest day in the world.
So let me start by asking, what motivated you to read this one poem?
Boy, it is one of my very favorites. I've loved this poem for a long time. It was in the first book of poems of Joy Harjo's that I read. Any one of like 10 different lines in this poem are some of my favorite lines of poetry that I've ever read. It's one of those poems I find it difficult to find words to get across what it means to me, because none of those words are as sort of striking as the words in the poem. I think it captures really beautifully this connection I make with summer, which is like all bets are off. Everything we thought about how the world works is out the window. Summer is the time to try everything, do everything, and to our point earlier, like not all of it is good. Not all of it is going to last, but this is the time to do it. Like, if winter is the time to hunker down and rely on what we know and to be in a reliable, consistent, safe space, summer is the time to throw all that out the window and just go for it. Follow this urge to go wild, as she says. Even if it leads us to sometimes to even kind of dangerous places, in order to like let every flower bloom and just see what happens. But as we can talk about, and I think she gets to in the poem, it can be trouble. Like, it can be a dangerous spot. It can be uncertain. It can create a lot of instability that is not always comfortable. But that's sort of the basic feeling that I get when I read this poem that I really love.
To me, this poem reads as a commentary on where we're at society-wise.
Yeah.
And so what is so striking about it, like you said, I think that there are so many verses in this poem that I would just keep around because of how powerful they are. But there is also the imagery of it. And so I think that, things like the description of the squash erupting in flowers, or just, locating the point of dawning, I think that there is so much of it. And I don't know if like that happens to you, and perhaps it's because of the way that it's also formatted on the page, but for some reason, the color orange comes to my mind a lot in this poem. Mm-hmm. That it just like stays with me in this weird sense where it's like, it's not the brightness of the sun in yellow, but it's also not like the hotness of red in fire.
Yes.
So yeah,
it's both. Like, it's both. It's literally, but like the color orange is both of those, and I think this poem gives us both. I think there are parts of this poem you could pull out, and it could be sort of a classic kind of very stereotypical summer poem of like, oh, like it's the color of the sun and like everyone's like it's blooming and things are going wild. But then it is this sort of like red. It's also this red. Like there's anger, I think, also in this poem. There's this sort of simmering, that this, especially the lines of I remember when there was no urge to cut the land or each other into pieces,
Hmm.
when we knew how to think in beautiful, which is just it's the perfect line, like thinking in beautiful, like beautiful as a language, as like an internal language that we have, and she's lamenting that we don't have that anymore.
And this is part of what sparks to me this idea of the social commentary of the poem. But like a line like "a human mind is small when thinking of small things" feels like such an indictment of where we're at,
Yes.
um,
Yes.
you know, collectively.
Hmm.
That I I really appreciate it to a certain extent. I will say, um, it surprised me in some ways that I feel like the heaviness of the mood in my poem matched to a certain extent the ones in
Hmm.
yours, despite all that we talked about how we both feel very differently about summer.
Yeah. No, it's all there. I mean, it's even as I was reading it and being reminded of certain lines. I mean, she says, "I'm lingering at the edge of a broken heart." She's on the precipice, right? Like, I think, you know, in the if we created a story with both of these
Mhm.
poems, like this is the first one, and there's lots of things happening and not all of it is good. There's lots of desire, and like the line about the musk of other dogs, it's very like raw and visceral. um and then like maybe the poem you chose is shortly after this one, of like, well, after after the ocean has crushed you and it's all falling apart.
Mhm.
I mean, she says in the poem, like it's not all sunshine and daisies. Like she says, it's coming apart and everyone knows it.
Mhm.
Um, that's a pretty straightforward, like not all is well in the world.
Yeah.
What I love about the poem is that it's not just that it contains both, it's that to me it's an ode, especially the last few lines. It's an ode to being honest and clear-eyed about all of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Mhm.
The line you pointed out, the human mind is small when thinking of small things. It is large when embracing the maker of walking, thinking, and flying. And she talks about like locating that sense beyond desire, like something even bigger than this very just raw basic feeling of desire, and taking in all of it, locating the point of dawning, which again, like this absolutely gorgeous line. um and then following that bigger, more important, more honest feeling wherever it goes. It's not always going to be good. She says, "I will not eat or drink until I stagger into the earth with grief." Uh, I mean, these are this is what I'm talking about when I like read these lines. I'm like, oh, I will never be a poet. Like this, that is like, in my wildest dreams, I could not come up with a line like that. That gets so honestly at this sense of like, well, let's put this out all on the table. Be honest about where we're at as individuals, as a society. Like summer is our time when we can do this and embrace this emergence of whatever it is that comes, and follow it, like stagger after it into the earth, even if it brings us all this grief.
Yeah. Going back to it, this is very rare. It's not something that happens often to me. But as you were connecting the two poems and thinking about, like this one as the beginning, the one by Vilariño as the continuation of it, it came to my mind like if I had like there are two colors that I'm associating with them, like this one orange, and the Vilariño one like dark blue.
But yeah,
And so kind of
absolutely.
like the whole spectrum of the experience, um, which is, in some ways kind of like one could argue it's kind of like a little bit shifted in focus, because usually orange is something that, at least for me, I deeply associate with fall.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was interested in hearing what led you to like pick the poem, in part because given our different stances on summer, I felt like this one spoke to me in a similar way to the other, but um whereas like the Idea Villarino one is more personal to like the personal grief of a breakup or, a lost love. This one speaks to me more from like the collective grief of where we are and where we're heading. And, like references like the new car and the cigarette, and the just realizing that I don't need either of those. Why
Right.
am I now having this inner dialogue? That really, really spoke to me from that perspective. So for me, like summer kind of like got lost because I just like held on to that part instead.
I mean, I to your point, which I totally agree with. I do think these poems are more similar than I had initially given them credit for. I think they just take different, slightly different perspectives, or come at actually kind of similar feelings from different ends of it. That I think the Vilariño poem is more solo, individual, inward looking on complicated grief, blackest depths of pain, these different things. And I think Emergence is much more there's grief in there. I mean, she talks about grief. I think there's a lot of those same feelings, but it's very collective, outward looking, exploding out rather than collapsing in. That's why they initially struck me kind of aesthetically as very different poems. And I think they are in some ways, but that doesn't mean that the underlying feeling beneath them does not come from the same place. I think it does come from the same place. And I really appreciate that.
It's
We've done
not
it
my
again.
intent to it's not my intent to like rain on anyone's summer parade, but you cannot explore these themes and these poems and not have us go in the depth of like feelings.
It's poetry. Of course we're going to be in the depths of feelings, and I should have known you would drag me down there with you, so But as usual, we have found some lovely connections between the two, which I always love when we can do that. As always, our conversation has made me love both of these poems even more than when we started them. So thank you for helping me do that and helping me see all sides of summer, good, bad, and ugly.
And thank you for holding space for my contrarian takes on summer. I really love this this poem that you brought by Joy Harjo, and I really look forward to continue delving into their work. Because this one, as you said, like it has so many parts to it that I think will stick with me for a while.
I'm glad to hear it. I'll have to bring another one at some point. So we've thanked each other, and we'll thank the listeners for hanging with us and enjoying these poems with us. We will see you all in the next month.
Yes, see you next month.